pick up once again on public sector strikes, but also look at problems with the steel industry and forthcoming changes to the support packages for energy bills with the Welsh Secretary David T.C. Davies. Bore da, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. There is hardly a public sector worker who isn't already on strike or threatening to go on strike at the moment. I mean, how do you reflect on that as a UK government, given that many of the unions are pointing at your government and saying that below inflation pay rises over the best part of a decade are the problem here?
Well, look, first of all, at a UK level, we respect the work that's been done by public sector workers, including nurses, but not only nurses, teachers, college lecturers, actually those who work in the civil service. All public sector workers have an important role to play, so we recognise and acknowledge that. No government can guarantee that everyone everywhere is going to get a pay rise of inflation plus a bit more at all times. It's just not possible to do that.
But the problem is it's been that case for so many years now. This isn't just a one-off when inflation is at double-digit figures. You know, they've had pay freezes or 1% increases below inflation for, as I said, the best part of a decade.
Well, I don't think I'd necessarily accept the figures that have been put forward by the unions because they don't take account of the fact that bandings have changed, that people have gone into, for example, with many NHS workers now, they have an automatic pay rise every year anyway. And also the pensions are much more generous in the public sector than the private sector.
You can't argue with the fact that people clearly feel that they're not being paid enough.
I can't argue with that. No, I mean, most people are saying they're not being paid enough. But the reason being put forward, and you've mentioned it, is inflation. Now, the answer to deal with inflation is not to give everyone a pay rise of 20% or whatever is being asked for. That would just create more inflation and more problems. If we gave everyone...
Well, there are some who disagree with that, saying that there are other factors that are hitting inflation at the moment.
No, I don't think so. I think everyone accepts that if you gave a 20% pay rise across the board to all public sector staff, which would immediately be wanted by everyone in the private sector, that would cause inflation and that would cause the same problem next year. But one thing we haven't really talked about is the fact that in Wales, most of this is down to the Welsh government anyway. They're responsible for paying teachers. They wanted that responsibility. They asked for it. They got it. Now they're trying to turn their back on it. Same with the NHS. So I, as part of UK government, have got no control of what the Welsh government pay to teachers or to.
But you know the link
nurses
here, don't you? You know,
well,
extra cash offered in Westminster results in extra cash
not necessarily.
for the Welsh government.
Not necessarily.
If it's new cash, that's what happens.
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't, because we've actually been paying the Welsh government £1.20 for every pound spent in the UK on public services, and that money certainly hasn't fed its way through to the NHS. That's why we've got the worst NHS waiting times in the whole of the United Kingdom and the worst educational outcomes. We reckon that they're spending around £1.5 for every pound spent in England, and yet they're getting £1.20. And I'd like to, ask of Welsh Government ministers, where's that extra money gone? It's certainly not going on wages, on pay rises for teachers or nurses. It's not going into public services. I think it's being wasted on things like the failed M4 relief project, the hundreds of millions that have been put into Cardiff Airport.
I could give you a long list of projects that the UK government has wasted money on
£100 million
as well.
Which they want to spend on increasing numbers of the Senate.
And billions of pounds lost on PPE, for example, during the COVID inquiry. We could trade
I'd love
figures.
To come back and talk about that.
Well, can we talk about strikes, strike laws? Now, under your plans as a government, you want to introduce a new law that would basically force a nurse or a doctor or a teacher who has democratically voted to strike, you could potentially force them to have to go in to work. That's not very democratic.
Well, we can't force people to go into work. What we're saying is that there should be minimum safety standards in place. But to be honest, that already happens because actually
the unions haven't been...
Well, to make sure it happens, that we can guarantee that it happens, because the unions haven't been.
It does happen.
Well, let me praise the unions for a minute, James. Okay, I'm going to say this: the unions have actually been quite responsible in terms of these strikes, in making sure, for example, that ambulance staff, paramedics will do call-outs. What we want to do is put that on a statutory footing, as we've seen in many other European countries. We are aligning ourselves with what goes on in most of the EU, for example. We're simply making sure that whilst we recognise the absolute right of people to withdraw their labour...
But a lot of that work happens in negotiation with unions. And if you think that they're already doing a good job, forcing them to do it is not the way to go about it,
all we're doing is putting that on a statutory footing, because I don't think the unions themselves, all the nurses, all the paramedics would want a situation where people were actually not receiving emergency care as a result of a strike that was going on. We're making sure that that happens. We're putting it on a statutory basis, but actually it generally happens anyway at the moment.
And the Prime Minister and government ministers have repeatedly said that this is an idea that's backed by the International Labour Organization, the ILO, but the boss of that body has said this week that that's not the case.
Well, I think the ILO recognise that this is the legislation that's in place across many European countries. I don't know what the boss of the ILO has or has not said.
But it is an argument that's been made by the Prime Minister and others.
I'm making an argument that most people, including most people in unions and most people running unions, would recognise that we need to have minimum safety levels if people are going to withdraw their labour. It doesn't for 1 minute stop people from having the right to withdraw their labour.
Can we turn to steel? Because the Unite Union has sent a letter to UK government ministers saying that the steel industry is a whisker away from collapse, and they are pointing the finger at the UK government for inaction, basically, for not doing enough to ensure that it's on a sustainable footing.
Well, I wouldn't accept that at all. I mean, we put in place, for example, the energy bill guarantee scheme. So we're making sure that businesses don't foot the full price for the increase that's been caused in energy bills as a result of the invasion of the Ukraine. We've put an extra £800 million into the steel industry over the last 10 years to recognise the fact that they were already paying high energy prices as a result of the large amounts of electricity they're using, the carbon taxes. We've set up around £1.5 billion in various different funds, which steel companies can bid into in order to try and decarbonise and to go more green.
You don't think Unite has any case here?
Well, I certainly think the steel industry is in a difficult situation at the moment for a variety of factors, and the government recognised that, and that's why we put in those schemes. That's why, I mean, during COVID, we gave £30 million to CELSA to ensure that they could carry on operating, and there are discussions going on at the moment between the government and a number of steel companies in the UK, and there aren't that many of them, but I'm not going to say which ones there are.
Well, we know, for example, that Tata Steel, massive steel employer here in Wales and across the United Kingdom, has asked for about £1.5 billion from the UK government to help it decarbonise now over the next few years. Those talks have been going on for a while. What's happening with them?
Well, they are going on at the moment, and I think they're reaching quite an interesting stage. I had a discussion about that in the last 48 hours, and I think we might see some news shortly about it, but I don't think it's for me to get into trying to give a commentary on fairly confidential discussions between certain steel companies, which you may have mentioned, and the UK government.
But you generally, as a government, accept that there needs to be some support. For example, you've offered about £300 million to British Steel to help them decarbonise. So, you know, the checkbook is going to come open for Tata Steel as well.
Yeah, well, I can't say... right, I'll acknowledge that there are discussions going on between Tata and the government, but I don't want to say... And I've been asked not to say any more than that because I don't think Tata or the government want to run in commentary on it. What I can do is demonstrate the government's commitment. The 30 million I've mentioned for CELSA, the 800 million that's gone into supporting energy-intensive users such as steel companies, the 1.5 billion pounds worth of funds that they can bid into, and the discussions that are going on at the moment. So I don't deny for 1 minute that steel is facing difficult times.
We might get something on that before long. From April, there'll be a less generous package of support to help businesses with their energy bills. What's your government's assessment of whether those businesses are going to be able to cope with increased costs?
Well, we're in the difficult situation where, as a government, we have to say that we cannot underwrite the full costs of energy for all businesses and all domestic users for all time. So we put in place a big package. If the costs are not going to be borne by the business, I'm just wondering, what's your assessment of whether they are able to fund that cost? I mean, a lot depends on what happens with the international situation at the moment. I think we're all agreed that it would be outrageous to continue doing business with Russia. They were one of the world's biggest exporters of oil and gas, and they're offering it at very cheap rates. But clearly, we don't want to be in a position where we're doing anything to support an evil regime, and it's war on a completely innocent country. So we've had to remove them from the equation. That has, of course, put us in a very difficult position. It's meant that energy bills have gone up. We're trying to source energy from other places. We've done deals with Norway. We've done a deal with Qatar to get more energy in from there. We're bringing in LNG from America. We're doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that we try and replace the oil and gas that we've lost as a result of Russia being taken out of the market. But it has had an impact on bills for everyone. So we put in place an extensive scheme to support people domestically over the last year. We've done the same for businesses.
Yeah, Labour's saying that you should go further on the windfall tax on energy companies and basically keep that support package in place for domestic customers, but also non-domestic customers.
Well, when they talk about that, we're getting into a fairly complicated area here because a lot of a lot of companies have been making money as a result of energy price increases, but not all of them have been producing the energy. I mean, a lot of them have been producing energy from outside of the United Kingdom. They may be companies with a base in the UK that have been paying taxes in other parts of the world. There are renewable companies that have been doing very well at the moment, for example, wind farm companies. But if we turn around and say, OK, you're making too much money now, so we're going to slap a big tax on you, we're not going to get them coming back in and building more renewable energy plants of the future. We need people to come in here and build wind farms. We're trying to develop a floating offshore wind industry. So obviously, we don't want to be putting them in a situation where if they don't make any money, they foot the bill. And if they do make money, then we slap a great big tax on them, or they won't come here.
Last year, the Conservative party chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, initially denied that there was an issue with his tax affairs, but he has now been forced to admit that there was an issue, something he says was careless and not deliberate. Now, this story has rumbled on for quite some time. Does Nadhim Zahawi need to come clear and put all his tax affairs out on the table so we know exactly what was going on?
Well, I think he has been very clear, and I think the Inland Revenue have been very clear.
We don't know how much tax he's paid. We don't know exactly when the investigation was. We don't know lots of things.
Yeah, we know that he was like thousands of other companies, actually. His company was in dispute with HMRC. I mean, I as a
he initially denied that, didn't he? Why did he do that?
I don't know. As a constituency MP, I know lots of people have come to see me, smaller companies normally, who don't get involved with lawyers, say they have a dispute with HMRC, it gets sorted out. I mean, it's ridiculous to suggest that just because somebody who's come and set up a business, a multi-million-pound business, by the way, has a dispute with HMRC, well, they can't.
Of course, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer at one point. This is not just some.
No, and it just goes to show the system's working, because despite being Chancellor of the Exchequer, there was obviously some kind of a dispute going on, which ended with him having to pay some tax, which the HMRC said they were quite satisfied with. I mean, I don't get why this is becoming a big issue.
And then I feel that Labour are
trying to.
The Sunday Times is reporting this morning that the BBC chairman helped Boris Johnson secure an £800,000 loan when he was Prime Minister, weeks before Boris Johnson then appointed Richard Sharp to be the BBC chairman. Do you back Labour's call for a parliamentary investigation as to exactly what's happened here?
No, I don't know what the detail of this is. I mean, the first I saw it was something in the newspapers today, and I think you might want to go and ask Boris Johnson or somebody else for some answers on that one. But what I can say, Labour are jumping on absolutely anything at the moment because of the paucity of their own policies.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that is it for this week. Diolch bawb, thanks all. It's good to be back. As ever, please do get in touch. The email address is bbcpoliticswales@bbc.co.uk. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Have a great week, and hwyl fawr.